What's going on, Nerd Nation? Welcome back to another episode of the Comic Book Nerd Nation. Today we have a very, very special episode for you. Let's jump right in and do some introductions. I'm Fox2. Today I'm here with the whole F and Brian.
Hey.
I'm here with Topher.
Welcome back.
And we got Pirate.
Hey, guys.
And we are here with Green Lantern, not just Green Lantern, but he is well known for the artwork that he did on Green Lantern, and that is Mr. Darryl Banks.
Hello, everybody.
So, let's jump right in and start talking. The Green Lantern, you were most well known for that character. How did things evolve into you getting to step into the role as, the artist for the Green Lantern series?
Well, when I first began with DC Comics in about 1993, I was doing some fill-in work for Legion of Superheroes, and I had the same assistant editor for Legion of Superheroes as the assistant editor on Green Lantern, although I didn't know it at the time. So a lot of times I would mention it would be cool to draw a Lantern, because honestly, I didn't really grow up with the character. I just liked the idea of the powers, and I would, I even maintained a sketchbook or two of just things that Green Lantern would create, and also some costume and character ideas. But like I said, not so much that I was really into the book or anything. Although I take that back, I did like the Neil Adams run, and I would pick up certain issues of Green Lantern, but more based on the artist more than the character.
Mm-hmm.
Like let's say some of the older Dave Gibbons work, and like I said, Neil Adams, that sort of thing. But that was more because I was fans of them. I mean, they could have been drawing Howard the Duck, and I would have bought it, But as far as the character, didn't really get into him that much because he wasn't really making anything that I felt. My thing is if you can create literally just about anything, I'm not making a boxing glove or a vacuum sweeper or a mousetrap, I understand why they did it. Maybe it was time consuming to go beyond that, but I just felt like we could get really crazier with those creations.
Mm-hmm.
So never knowing that these comments I was making to my assistant editor, they were probably thinking, maybe we should consider this guy for the book. And one thing led to another, and that happened. Although when I came to the book, I wanted to be Hal Jordan because. If you're going to do Green Lantern, you want to do the definitive one. But they were like, well, Hal's not going to be around, a whole lot, during this, what we're about to do. And I was like, my editor goes, yeah, but you're going to be glad you were on the ground floor of this. And I'm like, well, if you say so. But he was right.
Brian, you mentioned something about the Green Lantern run that he did.
Yeah, you were a co-creator of Kyle Rayner. What goes into co-creating a character such as Kyle Rayner's caliber?
Well, I mean, keep in mind, this was the 90s where, everything was getting shuffled around. Characters were getting crazy looks, to think about when Azrael was Batman and he had that weird armor. It was, the Image era, so,
yeah.
Characters were looking really crazy. They were trying a lot of different things. And to arrive at the designs that we used for Kyle, I had to submit a whole lot of different costume ideas, and just keep in mind, think mid-90s, what characters were looking like, and so all of the rejected ideas kind of look like that, The only costume, even though I submitted several ideas, the one that they went with pretty much as is was Parallax. The only thing they had a problem with was his name. They wanted to call him the Protector because they already owned that copyright. And I thought, well, the word parallax, as I looked it up in a dictionary, one of the definitions deals with point of view. And I said, if anything else, his point of view has severely changed. So they still weren't sold. I really had to, kind of push the issue a little bit, without being annoying. But I really didn't want to spend the time I did on the design only to call him the Protector, mainly because it didn't fit his character at that time, So they eventually relented, and they liked it, and it's funny, they even, apparently Jeff Johns knows that name because there was even a Flash Parallax, and there was that creature in the movie was Parallax. Like, wow, for something they didn't like, it's like now it's
right.
used to a lot.
It's funny how things like that happen. It's not popular now, but give it a few years, give it 10 years,
Right.
all of a sudden Polaroid cameras are coming back or something.
You got to let it marinate a little bit.
Right.
You know?
You just got to let it marinate.
So in
There
making
was one other element that they didn't like also, and that was Kyle's symbol. They wanted to keep the original symbol, which I asked them. I said, "Well, I don't have any problem with that." But you said that you wanted him. I said, "You said that you wanted a radically different design that just literally didn't feel like anything we'd seen before." And I thought the symbol should go along with it. And they're like, "Well, we don't want to be completely unrecognizable." But I said, "That's what you said." And like, "Yeah, we did." And I said, "Plus, since Kyle isn't using the oath, I made that symbol so it's split in half. Like especially in the center, like a moon and a sun. It's like bright as day, black as night. It's like a hint at the oath." And they're like, "Oh, okay. Well, in that case, yeah, let's stick with it." So once again, they weren't crazy about it, but then I've seen it on T-shirts and pins and lamps and everything else. So.
Wow. Chris, go ahead.
So, once you got writing, or once you got drawing Kyle Rayner, was there stuff that that you could do with him that you couldn't necessarily have done with Hal, or did you get to be more comfortable doing a new character, or do you have any regrets about not being able to do Hal Jordan, or?
Well, I mean, Hal was in it. He just wasn't the main character, throughout the run. But I got to draw Hal plenty of times. Their powers is not so much that Kyle had abilities that Hal didn't have, except Kyle didn't have the weakness to the color yellow. But other than that, had Hal concentrated, he could have created anything that Kyle created. As you'll notice nowadays, Hal Jordan's creations are pretty detailed. I was kind of like, wonder where they got that from. Beforehand, like I said, he was making just, basic geometric shapes, boxing gloves and mouse traps,
Right.
So now, I noticed in recent years, he's making more detailed creations, even though they don't bother explaining why all of a sudden he has this great imagination. They're just going with it, which I'm fine with it. But with Kyle, the reason the reason he created so many weird things is because he was an artist. His mind's all over the place, so it fit with his character. And actually, that part was a surprise. I didn't know that they were going to make Kyle an artist. A lot of people thought that was my idea. I was like, no, that was presented to me, and I loved it. For obvious reasons.
Is that
so?
Go ahead.
On one of our first podcasts, we actually asked each other the question of, if we found a Green Lantern ring, what would be our favorite construct? What would be our signature shape that we would use to fight with? And we came up with some pretty interesting answers. But I'd be interested to hear yours.
Oh, it has to be just one object.
Yeah, like just if you were to pick one that would be your signature go-to, what would it be?
I don't know if this counts, but Kyle, when I was on the book, my editor gave me a limitation, although even if he didn't, I would have liked to have done it anyways, and that is, don't create the same thing twice. In other words, Green Lantern's going to always need a shield, but he's always make the shield different. If you've done a medieval shield, don't do any more medieval shields. Do a like an anime-looking shield. And if you've done that, then make it shaped like a turtle shell. Just always change the design. But with one exception, is once in a while, Kyle will find himself fighting someone like, let's say, that have super strength or whatever. He'd create this armor and fight them like hand to hand. Now that armor could stay the same. That's the only thing that I could draw that could be repeated from time to time. And so I guess if I could create something to do that, because it covers you on all angles, and you can modify it if necessary.
That's a way better thought out answer than ours.
Yeah, ours were nowhere near that good.
I'm hearing a lot of, like, when you talk about like the ideas that you took to DC and the feedback, and then how they wanted to all of a sudden introduce that Kyle was an artist, and all these changes and curveballs and stuff that are taking place. Is that frustrating from an artist standpoint? Like when they say they want it to be different, but then you bring them something different, and they're like, "Oh, whoa, that's too different. That's not, or this isn't different enough." Does that get aggravating at times?
Oh, not at all. I loved it. Mainly, keep in mind, before working with DC, I worked 5 years in the independents, making $1.05 a page, so considering the income difference, I really didn't care what they wanted. They could change it all they want. They paid me for everything I did. So, plus having, my background in art is actually not comics, it's commercial art, which is pretty much what I do at the moment. But I'm used to that. That's how the process works. You submit things, the client looks it over, changes their mind, and that's just part of the process. So no, I didn't have a problem with it, especially considering where we were going with it.
Right.
That was exciting. I'm like, whatever we decide, this is going to end up being a published work. I've done tons of things that never saw published. So no, actually, that wasn't frustrating. The only thing that jumps out at me frustrating during that process, we did when we did the issue with Hal Jordan's funeral. We originally were allowed to have Hawkman in it. And, the Hawkman family, they take up a lot of panel space with those wings and things. And he was going through a lot as far as his role in the DC universe. And so after the pages were drawn, then I guess the Hawkman office decided, well, no, he can't appear in that. So, they had to edit him out. And so, that's making big gaps in panels that, I said, it's not like getting rid of Nightwing, who's not going to take up a lot of space, but these were, Hawkman, Hawkgirl, whatever, him and those wings, that took up space. So that was, that was a little frustrating.
So do you have to completely redraw those panels, or do you just go in and add some filler where he was at?
I think the inker did that. I didn't have to do, because this was after I had already penciled it. So I'm assuming either the inker did it or somebody in production had to go in and make patches.
Okay.
Of course, those patches, that could work for them and they could work against them. Probably the number one thing that works against them was the classic Alex in the fridge scene, which
that was my
which
favorite.
is one of the most horrific scenes in Green Lantern, and it wasn't that way originally.
Really?
I did a recent interview talking about when I drew it. The fridge was open. You could see Alex in there. She was intact. She was dead, but the shells were smashed and taken out so that it was one body in there. And they're like, no, we can't show that. So we're going to have another artist create a door and have it partially closed. So I could tell people, my fridge, I've never lived in a home that had a fridge big enough to put a body in it. So the first thing I thought was, she's in pieces in there. A head's on one shelf and a foot's on another. So their attempt to dull it, to me, made it a lot worse.
Wow.
Yeah, that's true. It leaves a little more to the imagination that would tend to veer more towards the gruesome side than the other way around.
Right.
Wow.
But Juan and I, we laugh about that to this day. Truth, like censorship that went backwards, but that was pretty scary.
So with all the cinematic universe out there developing, and the Marvel movies, and the talk of the potential Superman Batman movie in the future, and all this stuff that's happening, I'm curious to know what your thoughts of the Green Lantern movie that Ryan Reynolds was in as Hal Jordan.
It had its problems, but I also look at the fact that was a first fruits effort. Look at how many Batman, Superman, even Wonder Woman to a degree, have had attempts, over the decades. But, that was it for Green Lantern. Unless you want to count that cameo appearance he had in that 1970s, what was it, with all the Super Friends live action that had Adam West and Burt Ward in it. If you want to count that, which I kind of don't, he's never really had an attempt at live action. So, considering that was the first attempt, I thought it was really good in that
That's
regard.
True.
But I think the main thing that hurt it is I really would have reworked it and not had the Hector Hammond storyline. I just wanted Sinestro versus Hal to be the point of the conflict. Myself.
Yeah, that would have been awesome. I like the movie. I mean, like you said, there's some stuff in it that's kind of like, don't really care for this or that, but as a whole, I think the movie is pretty watchable, and I enjoy watching it. I have it on the shelf over here.
Sure. I mean, I have it myself. I think they were also, when I think of Hal Jordan, I think of, he's almost the polar opposite of a Kyle Rayner. I mean, where a lot of Green Lanterns are unsure, Hal is. I mean, he was chosen by the Ring to be Green Lantern. Of course, he was in the movie also, but you know what I mean? Hal is, he's not the everyday guy. You know, he was heroic before he had powers. You know what I mean? And in the movie, you know, they went a different angle with it, but it was watchable. It was entertaining. I don't know if modern audiences would be okay with a confident Hal Jordan Green Lantern. You know what I mean? I think they probably made the right choice. Honestly, a lot of the problems, I think, is a lot of audiences just don't like Ryan Reynolds, apparently. It's what I'm getting.
I think regardless of who the actor is that is chosen to play, a superhero that's been established for decades, there's gonna be people out there that think that it's a terrible decision. It doesn't matter if it's Ben Affleck playing Batman. It doesn't matter if it's Ryan Reynolds playing Green Lantern. It doesn't matter who it is. Somebody somewhere is going to be an internet warrior about it and have something to say.
Right.
I liked Ryan Reynolds in it. I just thought it went a little too far to the comedic side. You know, they were doing some slapstick bits, and it almost looked like The Mask at certain points. You know, just with some of the crazy, almost balloon animal looking stuff. But,
the Jim Carrey Mask movie.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
So you thought Hal Jordan was a good choice for the Lantern in that movie, though?
Well, yeah, I think, I wouldn't go back to an Alan Scott necessarily, and definitely wouldn't do Kyle. It just would be kind of confusing, especially if they had any sequels in mind. So, yeah, I'd say, beginning with Hal Jordan as the central Green Lantern for the first movie was a good choice.
Well, in all the cartoons, they had cartoons on TV for a long time leading up to that, and it was Jon Stewart in the cartoons. I'd heard that a lot of younger generation would go into the movie and be like, "Who's this Hal Jordan guy? Where's Jon Stewart?"
Well, they'd have to do their homework.
Yeah, read more comics.
Get online,
Pirate, did you have a question that you wanted to?
You pretty much, Chris just hit, or Topher just hit mine with the, the questioning of Hal Jordan, and you hit mine with the, the whole movie. But I got with the, on as a penciler, when you draw things, do you sometimes feel that, as an inker goes in and someone fills it and everything, do you feel sometimes that your work might not, like the image, like the picture that you're wanting to get out isn't actually, it doesn't come out looking the way that you picture it? Or do you guys kind of work pretty closely together with, people inking and drawing?
I have definitely have had bad ink jobs before. Yeah, if that's the question, yeah, that's happened. But then the good ones far outshine them, and so I don't really want to go into who's bad.
Right.
Even those, you know what? It's not so much they were bad; it's more like they were incompatible with me. For example, I've been inked by Mark Farmer, who I think is fantastic. His work on Alan Davis was stellar, but man, we just did not gel. And it definitely wasn't a reflection on him because, like I said, his work is amazing. As a matter of fact, when I was told that he was going to do an issue, I was blown away by it. But I just kept thinking, no, our approach was so different. It didn't really work the way I felt it probably should have. And obviously, no reflection on him. I to this day think he's an amazing inker. But just I don't know, it's just kind of really didn't come together.
I can see that.
Wow.
But go ahead.
When you're drawing, like when you're, he mentioned, does it? You obviously see a panel or a picture in your head before you start putting it to paper and everything like that. And when you're starting, I don't think any of us here have a lick of artistic capability as far as
I could
drawing.
draw good stick figures.
There you go. But where do you start? Do you start on, the shield or do you start on the mask or is there a specific, you get the outline of the body first or how does how do you approach the task of putting a panel together?
Well, you've got to start with a preliminary thumbnail of what needs to happen in the panel as a whole. You can't really start with individual pieces. Almost like, imagine, have you ever seen movie storyboards?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like how it's a lot like that. You know, you've got to plan the action, what needs to happen from A to B, scene wise, because obviously comic book images don't move, but you have to imply the movement, and that comes from composition, camera angle, and even lighting can play a part. And you kind of hash that sort of thing out in thumbnails and prelims, and then once that's nailed down pretty good, then it's time to do the final rendering.
Oh, wow. So when you go to the final rendering, then you've already got a pretty solid idea of the pose, the camera angle, as far as that goes for the characters in the panel. You already have a pretty good idea of where you want them and how they're going to look and stuff. When you go to actually start drawing that final version of the panel, is there a certain part of the character or the background, for that matter, that you work left to right or top to bottom or anything like that? Or
no, it kind of depends on the panel. But the main thing is to know what I'm doing. The worst thing that I could ever run into is not being specific in the preliminaries, and I'm sitting there staring at a blank panel going, kind of like this, kind of like that. Oh, that's a time killer, and wasting time is one of the worst enemies you can have as a penciler. It's all about saving time. So once it really, with as time progresses, the more specific the prelim, the better it is. It's almost like when it comes down to the final rendering, I almost I don't want to really have to be thinking about very much anything. I want to be able to even have the TV on if necessary. It's just rendering. It's almost like the prelim is normal definition, and the final art is like high definition. It's the same thing. It's just more fine tuned with more detail.
Okay.
But all the elements are still there. That sort of thing. AM to FM. If that makes sense. What's AM? Back in the 1800s, we had a thing called AM radio.
Right. I imagine a lot of the people listening to this right now probably, AM radio.
What's an AM?
Yeah.
Is that the morning?
Yeah. They got morning radio?
So on panels where there's dialogue, I imagine the positioning of characters and more static poses and whatnot are somewhat dictated by the conversation. But in a fight scene, who determines the choreography? Who's getting punched, who's doing what move? As the artist, do you get to decide a lot of how that goes, or is it a collaboration between the writer and the penciler, or somebody plotting figure out exactly what action is taking place in each one, or how's that work?
Different writers have different approaches. Most of the writers I've worked with, well, actually, no, that's not true. Not most. Just some, particularly Ron Mars. He thinks very visually, so he's very clear on what needs to be seen. But then it's flexible enough where it's not like I'm just doing 100% of what he said. It's more like the point that gets across. That's called, it's kind of known in the industry as the DC method of scripting. Where supposed to, let's say, the Marvel style of scripting, they might have the plot just says in pages 1 through 4, a fight scene between character A, character B. What happens is up to the penciler. Now, I prefer getting specific, mainly because I don't want to have to sit and create it and then turn around and draw it. To me, that's even an additional job. But most artists I talk to prefer the Marvel way. But to me, since I'm not writing the story, I want to have an idea what did the writer have in mind, so that I can bring that out. I'm trusting, their vision, so that I can, bring that to pass. But it's not so rigid where I can't change anything and have no leeway. You know what I mean?
Right.
I gotcha. So what are you, you mentioned earlier briefly that you're working mainly in commercial art now. Are you still working on anything in the comic industry, or just doing commercial stuff now, or?
I was about to say just commercial stuff, and then I just realized I am doing something that's comic related. It's an independent comic put out by a gentleman by the name of Alan Cordry called 8%. It deals with it deals with stories that have something to do with family members that have passed away because of pancreatic cancer.
Mm-hmm.
And Ron Mars has written a story in it because he lost his father to that. And of course, it drove. I was interested in it because my sister-in-law passed away from that. So, even though I had a busy schedule, but I have this thing. I hate cancer and everything that goes with it, and it's a dreaded
Amen.
disease. It's robbed a lot of people of their loved ones, and I thought, let me get this into my schedule. So, actually, I just did the preliminary sketch a couple of days ago, and Alan posted it on Facebook. I guess he liked the prelim so much, he even posted the prelim. I'm like, wow, that's not even the final one. So I take it that he liked it.
Good.
So that's comic related.
When is that slated to? Any idea when that's slated to be out? So we can maybe push that to all of our listeners as well. I'd like to get the word out about something like that.
That's actually a good question because he gave me till like the middle of April to do the pinup, which is in black and white, and then it's got to be colored after that. So I would say maybe follow his Facebook page. I believe he has one that would cover any kind of publication plans he had. I know it's got to be relatively soon. I don't think most comic projects. It's not like they're doing it and then you'll see it 5 years later.
Right. Yeah.
So
maybe summertime or
I'm
early
guessing.
fall or something.
Yeah, I'm going to say maybe sometime this summer, possibly.
Okay. Yeah, we'll have to stay tuned to that and potentially maybe have you back on to talk about it a little bit once that maybe we can get you and him to come on and talk about it and pitch it, get the word out a little bit.
That would be great. And I know he'd definitely be interested in doing that because he just got back from a show, I want to say in Indiana, where he and artist Corey Hampshire did a lot of promotions for it. Because Corey did several artworks and pinups for it. I think he maybe did a story. Another artist that did a story in the issue was Rick Leonardi, who you may remember from Spider-Man and Cloak and Dagger, etc. Who else? I know I'm forgetting a lot of people, but it's quite the star-studded cast, if you want to call it that, working on this. And I don't know. I mean, one, Alan is great to work with. His paid rates are amazing. He's an overall professional person to work with. So it's no surprise that he's getting the caliber of talent working on this. It's something that just about any company could probably do if they had their act together. But unfortunately, that's not always the case. But I was joking with Ron about Alan. I said, Alan's doing this independent comic thing all wrong. He's easy to get along with. You don't have to wonder where your check is, et cetera. You're supposed to leave people hanging in the dark and brag about it. But he's too professional. He's going to take over.
So I'm curious. Does anybody else jump in here, guys? I'm chock full of questions, so don't let me dictate the entire conversation here. Or I'll go right ahead.
Oh.
But I was curious. Like, you've talked about a lot of different projects that you've worked on, memories from the Green Lantern and stuff. Is there anything that stands out to you as one of the most memorable moments of your career in the comic book industry? Whether getting into the industry, whenever it was that you did, or something that you created or drew along the way, or something like that.
Wow, that could cover so many things, but I would say always topping the list was working on Green Lantern Silver Surfer. That was hard work, but it was a blast because I got to draw, Thanos, Terrax, and Parallax, and the Silver Surfer, and even a cameo from Galactus.
Nice.
The little kid in me was like, I can't believe I'm doing this professionally. As far as the Galactus, he wasn't originally supposed to be in there. I actually kept bugging Ron. I said, Ron, I don't know if I'll ever get to draw Galactus professionally. Let's at least have him in there somewhere. I said, well, he doesn't fit in the story. And
Make him fit.
but I got to do it. It's like, all right, how about a flashback with Surfer's origins? Yeah, that'll work. That'll work. So,
That's so cool. Well, do you keep stuff like that you're like really, obviously you were very passionate about that. Like you said, your inner child was coming out and just kicking and screaming from happiness. Do you keep those and like hang them up on the wall or anything?
no, my original pages, I that stuff was sold many years ago. I mean, it meant a lot to me. And I'm sure I photocopied them, but when a collector makes you an offer you can't refuse, I guess you could refuse it, but like, this will pay bills for several months. Yeah, okay, sold.
Yeah. Come to second thought, I don't really need this paper anymore.
I could draw another one.
Right.
There you go.
I still have the ability to do it again. So yeah, that's awesome. That has to be such a good feeling when a collector comes to you and offers you, some exorbitant amount of money, judging by the amount that some of these original art pieces go for. That's got to be such a rewarding feeling, just like,
it is.
I made it.
But I don't take any art sale for granted, even if it's a sketch of the con. It's somebody that liked my work enough to shell out their hard-earned money for it. It's no matter the amount. I don't take that for granted. And I appreciate every bit of it.
That's good. That's good to see that. I mean, to be perfectly honest with you, everybody that we've had the fortune of meeting through doing this podcast, Yale Stewart, yourself, Sean Forney, Bob Hall, Neil Adams, all the people that we've had on the podcast that have just been so humble and so nice and friendly and down to earth about everything. It's almost, it's, on several occasions we were sitting here before our first couple times of getting to interview, oh my gosh, this guy's an actual comic book artist. We're all like, oh my God, I'm so nervous. But then you get to talking to you guys, and you're people just like the rest of us, and it's really good to see that that level of geek stardom, if you will, hasn't.
But it's funny. When I'm doing conventions, I'm a professional. I've been doing this 25 years. I still get starstruck, and the worst case of starstruck-itis, if I can coin that phrase, came from when I met Keith Pollard for the first time, and I'm not really sure what happened, but it was probably one of my most embarrassing con moments ever. I walk up to him because grew up on his work on Spider-Man, his work on Thor, I go on, and he's also good friends with we have a mutual friend in Arvell Jones, so I thought, well, let me go introduce myself. And we're about to talk, and then I happened to just glance downward. He had original pages, from stuff I grew up on. And what happened next is kind of a blur. I just words were coming out, but they weren't forming complete sentences. I do remember this. This was the weirdest part. It's almost like somebody was controlling what I was saying, but my mind was saying, "Don't! What are you saying?" I go, "Yeah." So Thor, he lived near Michigan Avenue or something once, and there was something, but it was a rocket or something that was an issue. And he's kind of looking at me like, what? And I'm thinking, my words and my mind are not connected. What happened? Like something became unplugged.
Saw
and
that
it was
artwork and
I
you're
don't
like,
believe this.
I've done that before.
I was fine until I looked down. I mean, I was completely fine. I looked down. I'm like, oh my God! I remember getting on my bike and going to the drugstore and buying that issue. Here's the artwork. So then, it's like a spell that came over me.
That's so cool. I mean, the way you say that reminds me exactly how the four of us were acting right before we talked to Neil Adams.
Okay.
We were like going over some of his old work and stuff, and it's like, oh my God, I remember buying that. Oh my God, I remember buying that too. Oh my gosh, I can't believe we're getting ready to talk to this guy. And it's like, oh my gosh, I hope he doesn't think we're weird. And it's just back and forth.
I mean, whether professional or fan, we're really pretty much the same at heart. I mean, what I would do is, I've been doing this since I was a kid. I'll call up friends, and maybe I'll pull something out of a collection and go, remember this issue with so-and-so and this happened. And I do that with all my friends that are into comics. Well, I'm friends with, Terry Austin, who I had the pleasure of working with on Green Lantern. But what most of the time when we talk, we're talking toys, 'cause we're both toy maniacs, you know. And so I did that with him at one point with his own work. But I'm forgetting, like, you know who you're talking to? I'm like, yeah, I found this classic Ms. Marvel cover, drawn by Dave Cockrum, inked by Terry Austin. I'm like, you're talking to Terry Austin. But I forget that sometimes, you know. I just, you know, we so rarely talk about comics, or when we do, I'm more in that mode. But in that case, it was funny. I'm reminding him of his own work. I'm like, wait a minute. This is that guy, you know.
That's funny.
I'm like, this is the guy that worked on Death of the Phoenix and Creature from the Black Lagoon with Art Adams, you know, and he has that artwork, you know. It's almost like if I focus too much on that, then I'll probably end up starstruck with him too. But like I said, we end up talking about toys and stuff so much that it kind of snaps me back to reality.
What's your favorite kind of toys?
Action figures.
Yeah, like
mainly Marvel Legends, and I also collect some imported stuff, you know, from Japan, like Ultraman related action figures. Those are probably top of my list of favorite stuff.
That's awesome.
That's cool.
Yeah, I'm trying to get into it. That is a very expensive collecting habit, I've noticed. The toys can get very pricey. Especially some of the statues and stuff that they have are just so awesome. The comic book store here locally that some of us go to, they have this statue from Batman Hush of Batman kissing Catwoman. And this thing, I mean, it's huge. It's probably, 2 foot tall, wouldn't you say, Chris?
Oh, wow.
It's pretty big.
It's probably 2 foot tall and like probably a foot and a half wide. And it's like super detailed and stuff. And they ordered it in for somebody, but the person hasn't come to pick it up. So it's like every time I go in on Wednesdays to pick up my new books, it's like sitting there and I'm looking at it, I'm like, God, that would look awesome over in the corner of my house. Like, I need to get that.
I wonder how much that was.
He said it was
you know what the price point?
He said it was like right around $220, I think.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
$220, $250 was the price point on it. But I mean, it is an absolutely beautiful statue. It's got like the cloud, like smoke looking stuff around their feet to symbolize, you know, the fact that they were like on top of the rooftops or whatever when they kissed in Hush.
Okay.
It's pretty neat statue. I would definitely, if you're big into stuff like that, you definitely should check that one out for sure.
So you said you were, you read comics a lot when you were younger. Do you still keep up with stuff today? What are you reading these days?
No, I don't really keep up with too much stuff today. I mean, there's a lot of great stuff I can tell, but I have so much from my own collection growing up that between rereading things or realizing a lot of things I had as a kid, I didn't actually read it. It's like I looked at them so much where I got the gist of the story, but realizing that, you know, I never actually read the story, you know, word balloon for word balloon, you know.
Right.
I've been, let's see, what have I been reading recently? Some old Giant Man stories. Actually, I never owned, but I have these discs that have been discontinued of. It was a company that was, I guess this is before Marvel went digital, but there was a company that had these discs that they would put, like, let's say 40 years of Fantastic Four on a disc, 40 years of the Hulk on a disc, 40 years of Avengers, etc. And so I was reading, let's say, things like Tales to Astonish and that sort of thing, were stuff that I definitely didn't collect. But just at one point I had this Hank Pym type of thing. Like, you know, he was, you know, even though he's kind of known for his, you know, being an eccentric character, but it didn't happen in a vacuum. There was hints at it even back in the 60s, you know. So I think that he's a character that a lot more can be done with him. But, you know, I mean, comics have changed a lot, as well as they should. But I think a lot of the things I like to read are a lot different than the type of hero today. I mean, I kind of like more of the, I don't know, I guess you could say cartoony type of thing, more like fun-oriented. You know, I mean, right now things are more Christopher Nolan, Batman serious, which is fine. There's a complete audience for that. But I guess the older I get, the more I head in the opposite direction. I want something that's more uplifting, lighthearted, because there's so many sad things that can happen to life. I'm like, I don't want it in my fantasy. So, but that's just, personal preference, but, there's especially, let's say, even with Green Lantern, like, man, first of all, the artwork nowadays is so amazing that they have, with Green Lantern, Justice League, Batman, it's like, wow, this is, you mentioned Neil Adams. See, growing up, we had Neil Adams, amongst, the artists that did things, but that was here and there, you know what I mean? But now we have artists that are, that detailed on a regular basis. And it's kind of like, man, kids today are so lucky. They have, that caliber of detailed art on most things.
Yeah, on whatever character is your flavor.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's pretty wild. So, real quick, before we wrap things up, you mentioned comic book conventions. You do a lot of comic book conventions, or just a few? Where can people find you at comic book conventions coming up?
I used to just do 2. Now I do. Wow, I add them all the time. I think I've got like 9 this year.
Oh wow!
Next weekend I'll be in Dayton, Ohio for the Gem City Comic Con.
We'll be there.
I will. Oh, great, good. Also, what have I got in May? I've got Motor City Comic Con in Detroit, and then later on that same month, I've got the Tri-State Comic Con in West Virginia, which that's a new show. I just started doing that last year. That was a lot bigger than I thought it was going to be. I guess in my mind, if it's a show I haven't heard of, I'm thinking, well, how big could it be? But great fans, great venue, everything. What else? Wow, I literally had to create a list. For years, all I did was Mid Ohio. Before Wizard did it, I took it over, and Pittsburgh Comic Con, and that was it. And a fellow artist, a friend of mine, Yuko Smith, was telling me that, man, you got to do some more. Shows, it helps you network to get other shows, and he was right. One of my favorites, Cincinnati Comic Con, coming up later in September.
We'll be at that one as well.
And also the Akron Comic Con and Cleveland Comic Con. Matter of fact, last year's Cleveland Comic Con, Ron Mars and I were there. That's the first time we've done a show together in 15 years. So
wow.
That was, it was in a small hotel, but it was funny. In my mind, I'm thinking, well, I don't really need to focus on, getting tons of artwork and done all that. Just in my mind, I'm thinking, well, I'll just hang out with Ron and just meet fans, etc. But man, I did really well financially there as well. And I didn't really expect it. It's just the fans, they ate up my prints because I do con sketches and I do prints, and I'm thinking, well, I'll just be talking to Ron. I probably won't be drawing much. And next thing like, wow, they came by and they I'd signed books and all that kind of thing, and they really enjoyed the print. So, yeah, I'm trying to add to shows as often as possible as I can fit it into my schedule. And, whenever you guys see me, always feel free to come by and say hi.
Absolutely, we'll definitely stop by your table next weekend and say hi. Actually, it won't be next weekend by the time this comes out, but as we're recording it, anyway. So,
Okay.
That's about it, guys. If you guys happen to be at a comic book convention. If you're listening to this and you happen to be at a comic book convention where Darryl Banks is there, do us all a favor. Stop by, buy about 17 or 20 of his prints. He'd be happy to sign them for you. Don't worry. And just, plaster them all over your walls. So, Darryl, we really, really appreciate you being on the show today with us. It means a lot to us to get to
my pleasure.
Get a little bit of insight from people inside the comic book industry and everything. So we do appreciate that. So we'll go ahead and sign out. I'm Fox 2. We got the whole F and Brian.
Laters.
Got Topher.
See you next week.
Got Pirate.
See you guys.
And we have Mr. Darryl Banks.
See you all very soon.